Good evening, everyone. So this is our fourth live stream, another model musings with Gavin Q. We're going to be looking at some long-range forecasts today and see how the winter is going to shape up, winter 2015-2016. We're also going to start off with some short-range forecasts, courtesy of the GFS and other associated models, and see what the weather's going to do and see if there's any imminently cold weather, because of course in 2012 it was only a couple of weeks from now that we got our first hint of snow. And I remember in 2012 there was where I was in the northeast, oh damn it, there was some snow where I was in the northeast. So at this time of year snow is possible. Anything you want to add to that, Gavel, or shall we just get on with the models?
Good evening, Quantum. Yeah, let's just get on with it. hopefully we'll have some sign of a change, because I'm fed up with this high pressure now. I've had enough of it.
Okay, so I'm on Meteosil, and this is the GFS, and feel free to comment, Gav, as we go through it. So this is today, 16th of October. You can see that high pressure. Well, actually, I'll go through and you can comment as if you want. So we've got high pressure currently to the north of Scotland, and so this is Sunday, demange Sunday. High pressure still in charge, but we can see that it's starting to recede a little bit to the south.
That's right. It's being put under pressure next week, and it has a bit of a go, I think, the atmosphere of getting rid of this high pressure, but I'm not sure it's going to come off, actually, and the high pressure might win out, actually.
I tend to find that when you, I mean, if we've been in the middle of the winter, this would be quite. I'm hesitant to say it would definitely be cold, because there's always these folks of cold highs that bring up relatively mild air off the continent, which is exactly what you don't want. But let's say this easterly we're in the middle of January and this was quite a cold easterly.
I think it would have been, actually, because the air was initially, anyway, I'm not sure about now, but the air was initially originated from a very long way east, wasn't it? So I think it would have been a pretty cold. It would have been a pretty cold shot with this high pressure.
And of course, there was, I believe, there was actually some snow in Germany, and Moscow saw its first snow of the season as well, which is still quite early, even for Moscow. But what I tend to find is that when you get these when you get these cold spells that you want, it's just sod's law that you tend to get stuff moving over the top. I mean, the recession of the high pressure south seems a quite common way to end a spell of quite cold weather. So I mean, I think this is fairly common, but you think that we might not see we might see the high pressure just clinging on. Even.
Well, I think it will be pushed south, and then it'll probably come back again. It'll probably cling on like a limpet and just rebuild again. I think that's what the GFS is going to do tonight.
But of course, the southeast, which has been dominated by these cold northeasterly winds. I mean, when the high pressure recedes south, I think the southeast will benefit from it. It might not warm up much, but at least it'll get rid of that nasty cloud and drizzle. So
the flow should revert to the Atlantic, so the east will benefit with that. There should be more sunshine next week in the east.
Yes. I just realised I wasn't actually presenting my screen. I think people can see it better now. Sorry about that. So this is Monday. So as we go through to, let's say, Wednesday, we can see this low pressure to the north, and we've got high pressure to the south. And what I tend to think of is that when you get this gradient of colour, so this colour is like the geopotential height, which is a measure of how high you have to go up in the atmosphere to get a certain pressure. So, but the blue of the colours generally mean that the pressure is quite low all the way up, and the red means it's generally quite high. And you can see this quite tough gradient between the red and the blue. And to me, that tends to be sort of indicative of the Atlantic being quite active. You won't want to be seeing this during the winter. It will be very bad for the prospects of snow and cold.
Yeah, well, that's normally the jet stream ramping up a bit, isn't it? When you get a big contrast in the colours.
So I mean, in this case, the jet stream would be sort of going over the top. So would be sitting to the south of the jet stream, which on the face of it implies that the weather would be fairly mild midweek. But I'm not convinced that it necessarily will be, given that the Atlantic is quite cold for the time of year. Did you want to comment on that?
Yeah, it's been the feature of the last few months that we've had this what they're terming the coal blob in the Atlantic Ocean, and there's been a lot. We've been hearing a lot about. There's been a lot saying about that this is the start of an. The latest one was about this is the start of an ice age. I read that a couple of days ago, whether it was yesterday. It's just really a cyclical change of the Atlantic. I don't think it's anything to be overly alarmed about. And when did I do the video? But I think it's last week or the week before. I can't remember. All these winter updates are sort of barraging me, so I can't remember when the last one was I talked about the Atlantic. But I think it was probably Sunday, and I showed some charts from of the Atlantic sea surface temperatures from 1984, I think. And anyway, back in the 1980s, the Atlantic was way, way colder than it is now. So, I mean, it's not to downplay it. There is a cold blob in the Atlantic, and it will have some effect. It has had an effect, I think. But no, I don't think it's the start of an ice age imminently.
Yeah, I mean, I'll definitely agree with that, and I don't want to say too much because I know that there are certain people that would quite like to sue me for disagreeing with them. But we see the same every year. Every October, we see ice age, snow in a couple of weeks, 5 months of winter. That sort of thing. It happens every single year. I can make a prediction now. It's going to happen next year. It's going to happen the year after. And one of these days they'll be right, because a broken clock's right twice a day. But to be honest, I wouldn't take too much stock of these extreme forecasts, because at the end of the day, no one can really predict so far in advance accurately. So, and when you get these really extreme forecasts, you tend to be a little bit suspicious of them.
There are forecasters that claim they can predict extreme seasons. I'm not all that convinced. Certainly, maybe they can, but the methodology I use is just you can sort of predict whether the season is going to be milder or colder, wetter, drier, that kind of thing. But
I mean, there's a certain group of people that always predicts cold winters. I mean, I've watched, I've read on your blog, and check out Gav's website if you haven't already. But Gav's got a guy on his website called Terry Charlie. He does seasonal forecasts, and the thing about him is that he does predict cold winters sometimes, but it doesn't happen every single year. You get a little bit suspicious when someone predicts cold winters year on year on year. They never predict a mild winter. They only ever predict a cold one.
Terry's great, isn't he?
Yeah.
I'm very proud that my website has managed to bring Terry to a wide audience, because I think his predictions are great. And I wish I could do the longer range stuff as well as Terry does it, actually, but I sort of just have a go at it. But Terry really knows his stuff, and I'm very proud that we've managed through Gav's Weathers to bring Terry to a wider audience.
There will be a link to Terry's page in the description, and if you're watching on Gav's Weatherfoots, you'll be able to navigate to that.
Yeah, I think know where Terry's page is on my website. So.
Okay. So continuing on, so this is next Wednesday, and obviously it's going to get less reliable as we go on. So Thursday here, we can still see that the high pressure is settled over the south of the UK, with the sort of milder winds coming over the top. So I think it could be quite pleasantly warm. So there's this thing called the phone effect, where you get moist winds from generally the west, but sometimes also the southwest, and they hit the mountain ranges of the UK, so mainly the Cairngorms, but also the Pennines. And when you get these warm, moist winds, the west tends to be very wet. Well, not wet, but moist. I mean, you get drizzle and light rain in the west and low cloud. But due to the phone effect, because of the clouds, because of the condensation happening on the eastern side of the mountains, of the higher ground, when the air descends on the other side, it tends to warm up very rapidly, and this is known as the phone effect, and this can cause very warm temperatures to appear on the eastern side. It's the reason why Aberdeen, being in the northeast of Scotland, often has the highest temperature in the UK. It's not something you necessarily expect, but if there is a phone effect as this model is suggesting with these warm westerly winds, we can't rule out temperatures getting to 20 degrees. I'd say it's unlikely, but we can't rule it out. And the places that would be most likely to see that would be Aberdeen, maybe Inverness, possibly Newcastle, the places to the east of higher ground.
Yeah, it's certainly possible. I mean, it's only, what is that? It's 22nd of October. So, I mean, on Halloween last year, we was over 21 Celsius, wasn't we? That was quite extreme, though, quite unusual. But you certainly wouldn't rule out 19, 20 degrees in the northeast of Scotland on that sort of southwesterly airstream.
The caveat is, of course, that the west is going to be seeing temperatures of 13 or 14 and rain. So this is for a few favoured spots that might see warmer temperatures next week. But there you go. What am I? I'm at 144. So let's look at Friday. So this is a little bit more interesting because we've got the high pressure starting to move towards the southeast, and we've got this sort of mid-Atlantic ridge starting to. I mean, there's this little bump in the jet stream. What do you think about that?
Yeah, it looks like it's trying to break our high pressure down and re-establish it ridge in the Atlantic. And I suspect what's going to happen is that ridge in the Atlantic will just take the place of the ridge that's being broken down, and actually there'll probably be, maybe turn a bit cooler, but there'll probably be very little change, actually. Certainly for the south, there's very little sign of rain coming through. I would think we'll run on a bit more, and I would think that ridge in the Atlantic is going to replace the ridge that is over us.
Okay, so we can see that the ridge is collapsing with the winds coming a little bit northerly over the UK.
Yeah, and here comes the next ridge from the Atlantic.
I mean, would you say there's a small chance of the high being more amplified and getting some of those warmer colours over Greenland?
It's possible, but there's another fairly deep low, isn't there? So that's probably going to run over the top and probably stop that from happening too much. I think the high pressure is just going to keep going on for the time being.
I mean, it's still quite chilly though. I mean, with winds temporarily going into the north, there could be a few ground frosts.
That's bringing colder air down from the north, so it would turn cooler, particularly at night.
So I mean, obviously we're getting towards Fantasy Island now, which is a crude term that means though it's getting less accurate.
Unreliable time frame of the model.
Yes, indeed. So this is 240 hours, and it's about as far as I'm comfortable to go. So this is the following Monday, 26th, and it's the day, like I was saying when we started this, that in 2012 we had northerly winds bringing snow showers. So on this day, 3 years ago, there was snow in the north, but we've actually got a quite nice calm picture with high pressure returning once again to the UK.
That's right. It's a little bit cooler though, so it will feel cool, but it's not.
So this is the 850 temperatures. We can see that the -4 is sort of flirting with the north of Scotland, so cold enough for snow on higher ground.
A little bit of wintry showers over the north of Scotland, probably.
So, do you want to have a look at one of the long-range forecasts now to keep people interested, and then we'll look at some of the other models maybe later?
Yeah, sure. We'll
we could do audience interaction and audience questions. So I've created a hashtag model musings if you want to post on there. But alternatively, you can post on Gav's website in his chat, or you can post in my chat on the YouTube, and we'll take some questions and comments in a bit. So shall we start with the Met Obs then?
Yeah, let's have a look at the UK Met. It's quite interesting. I've had a look at this a few days ago. It was quite interesting.
This is more your field. I am not so good on long range. So I guess we'll be looking at geopotential height. That's the one that's nice to look at. Or do you look at pressure?
Sea level pressure, probably.
Okay.
a bit more straightforward.
So thoughts about this one?
So that's the first 3 monthly period for November, December, January, the 3 months of November to January. And it's sort of Atlantic driven with, you've got the below average pressure in the north around Greenland, above average pressure to the south. And we're in between. So sort of bring westerlies through there. So it's pretty Atlantic driven, fairly mild sort of start to winter.
I mean, potentially quite wet as well. With all, I mean, when you see a lot of blue to the north, that implies that the polar vortex is going to be quite strong.
That's right. It would be pretty, stormy potentially for the north. Certainly quite wet in the north.
So let's go a little bit further on then. So this is December, January, and February. Thoughts about this one?
That's right. Well, we can see what's happened. We've lost the blues to the north. They've gone green. So pressure is rising to the north and to the west. We've got above average pressure to the west and almost going up to Iceland. Trough looks like it's dropping into Scandinavia. So it's gradually evolving into a slightly more blocked and cooler, I wouldn't necessarily say it's all that cold, but cooler pattern emerging as we're going, as we're progressing through the months.
And we can see that the Siberian high is quite strong.
That's right.
I mean, I'm not sure. The Siberian high is always there, so I'm not sure whether the Siberian high being strong on its own is necessarily.
It's a semi sort of permanent feature in the winter, isn't it? But if we go on to the next 3 months, then we've progressed further, and now we've got red colours appearing over Greenland and Iceland. So as we've progressed along, we've gone from gone quite quickly actually, because the November to January period is very Atlantic driven, whereas we get to the end of winter, this is January, February, March, we've gone into a far more blocked pattern. That is a proper blocking ridge in across Iceland and Greenland.
I mean, one thing that if you want to very crudely look at this, I know you talk a lot about the Atlantic oscillation and the Arctic oscillation, which are two indicators. They're not actually they're just extracted from the models. They're not actually predictors in themselves. But in this case, both of the indexes would be quite low. So we've got all this high pressure in the Arctic regions, which when you get high pressure in the Arctic, the cold air tends to move outside of the Arctic. So that's a good sign. But it
would be pushed out. The cold air would be pushed out via the trough, particularly over Scandinavia. That'd be a very cold trough.
I mean, it's a good thing to see this trough over Scandinavia then.
That's right, yeah, because that would be the cold air would be pushing out via the trough and the ridging over the pole. So that all looks pretty good for the end of winter to be cold. And I think that is based probably on a sudden stratospheric warming event.
Okay.
Because the UK Met is designed, I think it's specifically after what happened in 09-10 when things went a bit awry. The UK Met model is designed now to predict, and it does it quite well actually, I think. It predicts sudden stratospheric warmings in its extended range. So I think it's probably playing with the idea that there's some sort of sudden stratospheric warming going on there, which is why it appears to change very suddenly from the first 3 months to the final 3 months. That's a very rapid change. And I think it's because it's predicting a sudden stratospheric warming event sometime around the middle of the winter.
I mean, to be fair, we didn't have a sudden stratospheric warming, but we did have strat warmings both last year and the year before, and we also had all this red in the Arctic. So we had on the face of it, the odds of a cold winter last year and the year before were quite good, but we had two very mild winters, and the killer with that was low pressure coming out of America And while the while the Arctic oscillation was negative, the Atlantic oscillation was positive. So none of the cold air was all going into America rather than coming to us. And well, when I look at this, I see this big area of blue in the Pacific that wasn't there last year. Last year, I think this was. Or am I right about this? Wasn't this high pressure?
That is a change on the last couple of winters. Actually, it's just like I think America's probably going to have another fairly cold winter, especially in the south and the southeast, and possibly up the eastern seaboard. But I think the Pacific setup is different this year compared to last year because of El Niño. Primarily,
I mean, also I'm a little bit hopeful that we see this blue area here, and it's quite far to the south. If this was a good 1,000 miles further north, I'd be very worried, because that's exactly what the spoiler was last year and the year before. We had this cyclogenesis, or all this cold air was pouring into the east and the southeast of the United States. It was hitting the warm Atlantic, and that's a recipe for baroclinic production of all these cyclones that would just come across to the UK. And when we have all these cyclones, you're going to struggle to get cold weather. On the other hand, though, the Atlantic's cool this year, isn't it? So a cold Atlantic is going to make cyclogenesis harder.
Probably, yeah. It will probably struggle a little bit, although I'm not sure if there's really all that much in it, to be honest. I mean, we're talking about a couple of degrees, so it probably wouldn't. If the weather got itself into a very unsettled mode, I don't think that cold blob would be enough to really hold the Atlantic back. Actually,
I kind of agree with that.
It will help a little bit.
I mean, I'm glad to see this red over Iceland. I mean, that's for those that want a cold winter, that's good to see this instead of blue. It'd be awful if this was blue and this was orange. So this is the right way around. I mean, what I'd be tempted to say is that America might well get its third cold winter running, and we might well again see cold air in the south and the east. I wouldn't be surprised if that happens. It's just a case of whether that's a spoiler this year for the UK. So I think I'd be more confident in saying that America's going to have another cold winter. But as for the UK, it could go either way. We could get a repeat of last year with the Atlantic just coming through due to the cyclogenesis, or we could get high pressure in the mid-Atlantic, bringing cold air to both sides. And what I read was that when you get cold air in both America and the UK, it tends to be very severe. The most severe winters happen on both sides of the Atlantic, but they're quite rare. So
that's right. I think 63 was probably cold on both sides. 79 was cold on both sides of the Atlantic. I think 1985 was cold on both sides of the Atlantic. So and these are the cold at the cold end of the scale for us. So that is true. If you can get a blocking feature that's so intense that it makes both sides of the Atlantic cold, then normally it will be very cold. But we're going to take on board with this. In fact, we're talking about the second half of the winter. The first half of the winter, that November to January period, is completely Atlantic driven. There's no blocking in that period at all if the model is right. So that's going to be a very mobile and fairly mild period. And then this is January to March, of course. So the progression is increasingly cold, but the coldest part of it may not be until right at the very end of the winter, into start of the spring, if this model is correct.
I mean, of course, as the winter goes on, the sea to surface temperature is going to go down, and with a bit of luck, we might also get some ice, sea ice on the eastern seaboard, which we haven't really had that much in the last few years. And I mean, the Atlantic's already cold, but if we get a lot of cold water starting to develop here, that will really start to limit the cyclogenesis. So it makes perfect sense that at the start of the winter there's going to be more cyclogenic potential. Because the sea's warmer, and it's the warm sea interacting with very cold air that's causing these cyclones to be created.
And also, El Niño winters tend to be Atlantic driven and mild at the start, and then get cold later on. So, and I'm not quite sure why that happens, but it may be through the mechanism that you're just talking about, actually.
So, I mean, so would you say with regards to the El Nino probably, because I mean, the one thing that's consistent with El Nino is it makes a cold winter in the United States far more likely, in the east and south, I mean. That seems to be a given. So, again, the chance of a cold winter in the United States is very likely. I mean, you can only be so sure, but I'd say that another cold winter in the States is quite probable.
That's particularly so if the El Nino gets central based in the middle of the Pacific and it becomes cooler towards the eastern side of the Pacific. And that's because it sort of increases the southern branch of the jet stream through the south of America. So if you can get if they get a central based El Nino, and we don't have it yet. But the suggestion within the model output is that it should become central based. Then that will help America to get that third cold winter. And actually, I was asked about Canada, why many of the models, and indeed this one is doing it actually, is predicting quite a lot of high pressure up over Canada and a fairly mildish winter through central parts of Canada and up into northern Canada. And the reason, again, it ties in with the El Nino, that when we have these events, we tend to get the high pressure over the north, over Canada, and you tend to get the lower pressure along with the jet stream going through to the south.
Yeah, that tends to make sense. I agree with that. I guess if I had to plump for it, I'd say that maybe the really severe winter is slightly more likely. Of course, it's going to be very unlikely anyway because of this prospect of getting some quite strong blocking and cold air on both sides. But on the other hand, because of all this cold air in the States, I'd be tempted to say that the odds of a below average winter are slightly reduced, in particular when you take into account the first, December and January. Like we said, that the February probably will be a colder than average month. But overall, I think maybe I'd say that the winter as a whole is probably going to be slightly above average this year, with the caveat that there's probably a greater probability of it being a lot below average.
Yeah, that's right. You could get a situation where the first half is very mild compared to average, and then the second half is colder compared to average, and the two sort of cancel one another out. By the way, that's Kieran that asked that question about what's going on over Canada.
Okay.
Thanks very much to Kieran who asked that.
We'll probably do questions in a few minutes. Do you want to just have a quick look at the other parameters here?
That's
Which one would you say is most useful, like 850 temperature or 2 meter temperature?
2 meter. Tends to be simpler.
So it's still colder than average for.
Yeah, that's the blob, isn't it? The effect of the blob.
So I mean, I'm guessing that's because, despite the fact it's very zonal, we've got a cold Atlantic, and it's just going to drive things a little bit cooler than usual.
That's right. You can see how warm it is, though, across most of Europe. So that's the influence of the blob, and I'm a bit uncertain, really, about whether in a really Atlantic-driven month, whether it would be all that cool, really.
It makes me a little bit suspect as well. Is it possible that this is saying that there's quite a lot of returning polar maritime or just polar maritime, which we had a lot of that last year? Cold. I mean, for example, the south of Ireland actually had a pretty cold winter. It's usually very mild there. But if we get a lot of northwesterlies, it might not be that cold for the south and the east, but the north and west might enjoy quite a cold start to the winter.
Yeah, that's possible. If we get a situation where the first half of the winter is Atlantic driven, but it's a bit cooler in terms of we get some cold zonality, and then the second half of the winter we get the blocking, then we could come away with quite a cold winter, actually. So that's a possibility.
Okay, let's continue a little bit. Very little change at all as we go into the second.
December, January, February. Although the colours are reducing to the east a little bit, so they're returning nearer to average for Scandinavia and France. We're still more or less in those colder colours.
It's amazing how large the warm colours are. I mean, there's so much red and orange on there, but basically no blue at all.
That's right.
Is this what happens during an El Nino year? You get such a warm, globally warm, above average temperatures not everywhere, but
certainly it's spiking the I mean, this is a monster event, isn't it? It's going to be. I'm not sure if it's going to be the strongest recorded El Nino, but it's certainly a very big event. And the complication I've got doing my winter forecasting stuff this year is that sometimes when these monster events occur, you can get very, very strange things happening. For example, I'm not sure if you remember 97, 98, but that was a very bizarre winter. We had storms in December around Christmas. We had very violent storms, and then January, February, it was like almost like summer like temperatures. In February 1998, we went up to something like 18 Celsius, 18, 19, 20 Celsius even, I think, around Valentine's Day in 1998. And then it was snowing and frosty in April. And sometimes when these El Nino events get so strong, it can just produce very unpredictable and unusual patterns. So, and this is a very strong event. So it does add a level of danger, really, to attempting to do anything long range in a way. Because things can go very, very seriously awry very quickly in a strong El Nino winter.
Incidentally, the El Nino signature is this bank of red here in the Pacific. So this is where you want to be watching to see how strong the El Nino is, and you also get a little bit of a cooler bit here as well. But this red bit here is the main signature of the El Nino. So we can see that by the final 3 months, the cooler air is across here, but it's not the signature I was hoping for. I mean, the signature for a cold winter is you get. I mean, the UK is on the periphery of you get a really cold blob here, and then the UK is sort of on the edge of it. That would be a suggestion of a really cold winter. But we have the complete opposite. We have a cold blob over the UK and the Europe being on the periphery of it. I mean, that sort of goes against the pressure pattern, really. It seems rather odd. It doesn't seem like a really cold signal.
I think, although it's not going very cold for the 3 monthly period, we've got to remember this is January, February, March, so we've got a progression taking place. And certainly for the first bit of this 3 monthly period, see what I mean, we are probably still within relatively mild air, particularly across Central and Eastern Europe. So we've got to keep in mind that this is a progressive pattern that we're going to be starting off very, potentially anyway, very mild and Atlantic driven, and then we'll progress through the winter and finish up somewhere significantly colder. So if we could go on to another 3 months, we can't because this is the end as far as we can go with mild. But if we could go on to February, March, April, that could be an even colder signal.
Yeah, well, I mean, we see the colder part of the states, where I was suggesting the southeast, but this big red block is more extensive than I thought.
That's right. You can see the reds are quite clearly over Canada. I think it's very likely Canada is going to have a mild and anticyclonic winter, because that nearly always happens in an El Nino winter, but it's mild in Canada. The question is for Northern America, where is that exactly is that region going to sit? Is it going to be, if it goes a long way north, then the cold air will punch further down into the north of America. But that particular scenario is really just the southern branch of the jet stream bringing the cooler air through both southern and southeastern states, and not so much to the north. But we have to keep in mind that these are anomalies. So although that looks very warm for Canada, of course, in a Canadian winter, that's 2 Celsius above average. It's still going to be pretty cold, certainly by our standards. So when we're talking about these anomalies, I'm always correcting myself when I talk about temperature anomalies, because when you're talking about somewhere that's very cold and you're saying that the temperature is sort of 2-3 degrees above average, that will still be very cold as far as they are concerned, really, and particularly as far as we would think of cold weather.
Yeah. Shall we take questions now then? Do you want to, as usual, you could read out the ones on your website, and I can read out any ones that are on the YouTube if you want to do it that way.
Yeah, I've got Antonio. Hi to both. Do you think that this autumn, if high pressure continues, could be one of the top 10 driest on record? And I think that is a possibility, actually. I think we could, if these continuous ridges keep going on, I think it could be a very dry autumn. It's certainly going to be a very dry October now in the south anyway. I'm not sure quite what it's been like up in the north, but certainly I think the south is going to have a very dry October.
Did you have any other questions on your website that you wanted to address?
That's it for now. Let me just scan through. By the way, if anybody is watching this on the homepage of Gav's Weather Vids and they're not sure how to comment, they need to click the buttons on the top. We'll go to the buttons on the top of the page of Gav's Weather Vids, click chat, and that will take you to the chat area where you can ask your questions and leave your comments and that sort of thing. So I'm just having a look through. No, that's only it. We've done Kieran's question, I think. So that's it. I'll check Twitter as well because I did.
Okay. There's a few comments. Oh, so I've got a question. Will it be a white Christmas across the UK this year?
Oh, I'm not sure about that. Will it be a white Christmas? I don't know. If the UK Met long range model is correct, then probably not. No, it probably means that the first half of the winter is going to be pretty mild. And of course, that encompasses the Christmas period. So probably not. But of course, it's very early days, and it only takes it's one day. Trying to pick out one day this far away is sort of fraught with danger. So actually, it's the honest answer is probably that it's impossible to say whether it will be a white Christmas or not. Even in a very mild winter, you can get snow, and that snow might occur on Christmas Day. So it's impossible to say.
I mean, when was the last time we had a white Christmas? I mean, I remember 2010, of course, we had a white Christmas, but then 2010 it seemed to be snowing all the time. But apart from 2010, the last time I remember a white Christmas in isolation was 2004, which was a sort of northerly based plunge, and it was the west that bore the brunt of it. Is that right?
I've never had a white Christmas where it's snowing on Christmas Day. Of course, 2010 we had deep snow cover on the ground. Actually, I think that's probably more of a white Christmas, really, than the official definition, because the official definition of the white Christmas is that just one snowflake has to fall on a designated place. So you could get a sleety shower coming through at 3 o'clock in the afternoon on Christmas Day, and you blink and you miss it. But that's a white Christmas, whereas the deep snow cover and severe cold that we had in 2010 probably doesn't really meet the official definition of a white Christmas, because no or very little snow was actually falling in a lot of places. So the definition of it is a bit odd, I always think. And myself, I think that 2010 probably was my sort of white Christmas.
I mean, actually, I do remember snow. I remember snow in both 2004 actually falling, and in 2010 it was falling as well.
Really, it's falling maybe it was in 2010.
Yeah. So I've had at least 2 white Christmases in my lifetime that I can very clearly remember. There probably were a few more, but I was probably too young to really know about it. But anyway, we'll be taking more questions later. So if you want to post questions on either the YouTube live chat or Gav's page or on Twitter, we'll be checking those out. So I think now we'll go back to some of the models. I think the ECM is maybe starting to come out. So and then we'll continue with a few more long-range forecasts in a bit. So I'm just going to put the screen share back on, and you should be able to see it on the screen now. So this is the GEM, and what I've noticed is that the GEM tends to be quite progressive with cold scenarios. So if there's any hint of a cold scenario towards the end of October, the GEM should be the first one to sort of pick it up. That's what I tend to find. Did you want to make any comments on this, Gav? It seems roughly the same sort of pattern with high pressure starting to recede to the south.
Yeah, that's right. The Atlantic sort of is waking up a bit next week and putting the high pressure under pressure. It's starting to force it further south. But it's very similar to the GFS with the high pressure sticking around very closely, albeit move south. And there's another ridge replacing the first ridge as we progress through. A second ridge has moved in off the Atlantic. So we finish up pretty much with high pressure back over the top of the country again.
It's been quite a consistent theme. I mean, the GFS seem to like the idea of high pressure returning. So would this be one of the driest Octobers in quite a while then? Because October is usually the second wettest month, isn't it, after November?
It could be, and there can be, I've got to be careful what I say, there can be a link between drier Octobers and colder winter patterns, and it's probably something that I'll be looking at the start of November in the winter updates, actually. But I always used to think a warm and dry October was a signal for but potentially a colder winter anyway. But now I'm less interested in the temperature, actually. The temperature doesn't really seem to matter. It's more whether you get consistent high pressures, keeping it very dry through October. A lot of cold winters seem to be preceded by dry October. So talking about 2009 was very dry October, and then flipped to a very wet pattern for November 2009. 1995 was another one that had very dry October. I think 1978 was a dry October. 1962 was a dry October. Yeah, but I think there is that link there between dry Octobers, and this is definitely, whatever else happens, I think this is going to be a very dry October.
And potentially under that high pressure, if it does return, it could be quite cold. I mean, by the time we get to the end of October, the sun is quite a lot weaker. So say that under this, there's probably going to be more widespread ground frosts, and not just limited to Scotland, also.
That's right. If we go back and see the progression between that high pressure ridging in and losing the high pressure that we've got, I think we probably pulled down some colder air from the northwest. So as a same high, not so much actually, is it? A little bit. There's probably some sort of a weak cold front coming through, but not as much as on the GFS. But that's probably cooler than the first high pressure. So there probably would be ground frost at least under that.
Maybe kind of inversion conditions. I mean, there might well be some warm air at higher levels, but at lower levels it will be quite chilly, I imagine.
I would think so, yeah.
So, I mean, you really need westerly or southwesterly winds to get warm weather at this time of year. So Scotland still could be quite warm.
Yeah, that's right. The cold front looks as though it's less active on that particular model run compared to the GFS. First one we looked at, wasn't it? Been a very long day, so you've got to bear with me. But we looked at GFS first, and that brought down quite an active cold front, I think. And then as the second ridge built in, that would have been quite cold under that second ridge. This less so, but still the same sort of idea. And the GM is always a bit different anyway.
It suggests on I'm looking at a 2 metre temperature now, and obviously the resolution is quite low, but it suggests that the majority of England could be quite cold with the high pressure centred towards the south. You tend to get a reversal of the norm, with the England being cold and Scotland being milder than usual. So if we do get a lot of high pressure, it means that we could see some early frosts.
That's right. If this goes on with these areas of high pressure into November, then we could well be looking at quite a lot of frost. But I will think at some point the Atlantic's got to wake up and give us a wetter spell, because it's been going on for quite a long while now. So I will think at some point through November we'll probably have a ramp up of the Atlantic, but we'll see. We may be back. We'll keep it very dry even into November.
let's see what the master thinks, the ECM. Or if you look at the UKMO first, that's the Meteorist one. But I don't think we can get much information from that one anymore. So this is the Meteorist one. So again, similar idea, I imagine, with the high pressure receding south. But that's as far as we can go with the Meteorist one.
There's some sort of a cold front coming through there, probably at 144 hours, and then I would suspect it would build a ridge again. But of course, it's possible to say.
No. So unfortunately, we can no longer get information from the UKMO like we used to be able to. So let's have a quick look at the ECM. I think the ECM should have finished running by now. It tends to finish around this time. Oh, it's still got it's still got the 240 left to run, but it's nearly finished running.
Maybe by the time we've run through, it'll be completed.
So same idea with the high receding south and this low pressure trying to invade from the north, but not being overly successful.
It's trying to ramp up, isn't it? The jet stream of the Atlantic.
So this is Thursday next week, and I mean, again, we've got these very strong westerly winds, and when you get this sort of pattern with strong westerly winds that are picking up moisture out of the Atlantic, that could be very mild for the eastern facing. So I'll actually look at the 850 temperature and see if there's any warm air on that. So you can see, well, maybe it's not as warm as I thought it was actually. You can see that the warm air is mostly in the south, so maybe not a phone effect there, but still fairly mild for the time of year, I'd imagine, on that. If not necessarily wall-to-wall sunshine, it'd be quite cloudy, I imagine, as well.
Yeah, it looks pretty mild, drab sort of pattern.
It's the way it works, isn't it? I mean, in winter, mild weather is usually associated with wet weather, whereas in summer, mild weather is usually associated with dry weather. I mean, there's a reason for that. I mean, in summer, if you get a lot of dry weather, the sun's heat tends to dominate, so you get very warm weather as well. But in winter, when you get dry weather, the cold nights tend to dominate, so you get very, very cold conditions. So there's kind of a reversal. What's unusual? It's the situation that's unusual is getting cold and dry weather in summer. That's very unusual, and it's also unusual to get warm and dry weather in the winter. So
that's right. Yeah, that winter I was talking about, 97, 98, very odd and bizarre winter, and that had a lot of dry but very mild weather, particularly in the second half of sort of middle part of January, and then through most of February. It was, I think, February 1998 was one of the driest on record, but it was also exceptionally mild, with the air consistently wafting up from North Africa.
So, very unusual. That sounds.
Yeah, it was a very, very odd winter, and that was in a very strong El Niño. So we do always have to keep this at the back of our minds for the winter, that there is an idea, I think it's because of what happened in 09-10, that El Nino is a good signal for cold weather, and late winter that can be the case, but we do have to keep it in the back of our minds all the time. At 97, 98, the strongest El Nino recorded, it's also one of the mildest winters on record, so have to keep that in the back of our minds at all times.
I think we also have to keep in the back of our minds that 2010 was really a once-in-a-lifetime event. I mean, there's that December 2010 was the second coldest winter since the CET records began over 300 years ago. There's only been one colder December than that, 2010. We never, in our lifetime, we'll never see a December that is as cold as 2010 again. I think people should keep that in mind this is aimed at you lot that keep forecasting ice ages. That again, 2010 was a once in a lifetime event, and we might get a January that's as cold as that December. But I would be amazed if we get a December that is as cold as 2010 was in our lifetimes. So
it was a very extreme blocking pattern that set up in that December, but of course, the El Nino winter, because that was actually transitioning to La Nina that winter, 10-11. El Nino winter is 2009, 2010. So I think that it's that one actually more than what happened in December 2010 It's actually more 0910 that is giving us, or giving people the idea about El Nino is always a good signal for a cold winter, and that isn't the case.
I mean, from what I gather, with regards to the El Nino, I've looked through the literature on this, and there's quite good evidence that El Nino means cold winters for the south and east of the United States. That's quite good, and alternatively, it means warm winters for Canada and the west of the United States. That's fairly well established.
That's right, and normally quite wet for California. They should bust the drought this winter in California.
But for the UK, the link between El Nino and the winter is almost negligible. It's the existence of El Nino is almost arbitrary in determining whether the winter's going to be cold. And if I had to go for an answer, if I had to link the El Nino with anything, I would actually be tempted to say that it means that a slightly milder than average winter is more likely, not a colder than average winter. To me, an El Nino means very slightly more likely to be mild, not much more likely to be cold, as some people are suggesting.
Yeah, there's always people try to pinpoint one particular thing for us, and the problem with our weather is that there's always several things that need to be calculated. Now, you know, one of those things, of course, because it has a major effect on the weather in America, and we're downstream from America, so obviously it will have an effect on our weather, but by no means is it the only driver for us. And we saw this last year, if you remember, with the OPI thing and the snow across Russia. And again, that is something that I look at. If you watch the winter updates, you'll know that I do keep an eye on what's going on across Russia this time of year in terms of how quick the snow cover is building. But again, there's not one particular driver for us that is the key factor. It's a combination of different factors, which makes, of course, forecasting our weather very challenging. Because
the cyclone energy issue?
Yeah, I've been keeping an eye on that. It's another very quiet hurricane season, really, in the Atlantic. So
that's a bad sign for cold winter.
Yeah, but it's one of the things that I like to keep an eye on, because when you've got a lot of hurricanes in the Atlantic, sort of going into the polar region, and well, they don't go into the polar region, but the energy and the heat from the tropics eventually finishes up being distributed sort of around the Arctic areas. So if you get a lot of energy being dumped into the Arctic areas, then it can transfer back later on to an increased risk of blocking. So that's one of the things that does probably go against a cold winter a little bit.
So just continuing to look through the. I'm getting a little bit. This is a little bit different. So the ECM seems more keen to bring in this more northerly feed, a little bit like the GFS did.
Yeah, that's some more active cold front coming down, isn't it? So the air behind that would be quite chilly, especially in the north.
Wintry showers for the higher ground of Scotland.
I would think so, yeah.
I mean, if this happens, I mean, have you been watching the snowpatch stuff? I mean, this year has been a record. Well, I'm not sure if it's a record, but it's been it's certainly in the last 30 years, there's been more snow patches this year in Scotland than there has been in the last 30 years, which is quite interesting.
Really, I haven't been keeping an eye on that, so I didn't know. But
well, it's very interesting because last year was very, very good for snow patches. There were a lot of snow patches last year, and I think there's like an observation date in September, I think, where they measure how many there were. And last year it was something like, I'm pulling this figure out because I can't remember what it was, but just for illustrative purposes, it was something like, I don't know, 80 snow patches or something, where the average is like 20 or 30. So last year was there were a lot of snow patches, but this year it's like hundreds, like 300 snow patches. So the number this year is huge. And there's still snow caves on Ben Nevis, for example. So there's still a lot of snow left on Ben Nevis, and it's almost certainly there's going to be a lot more snow survival than usual, because obviously snow does survive every year, a small amount of it at that, but some does. And if we get this northwesterly wind, that's going to put some more fresh snow on these snow patches, so to keep them going a little bit longer. But I don't. I mean, the reason that we've had so many snow patches this year is because although our winter was quite mild and warm, for the cairngorms, for the higher ground of Scotland, it was a perfect winter for heavy snow. I mean, there was a constant wind from the Atlantic that brought all the moisture that you needed, and it didn't matter that the temperature was 1 degree above average. I mean, who cares if it's 1 degree above average when your average is -8 or something, as it would be in the hills of Scotland. So there was so much snow, and the way that when you get westerly winds, it tends to fall over onto the northeast slopes, which preserves it better. So the last few years have contributed to a lot of snow remnants in Scotland. So that's quite interesting. So there's more snow than usual, certainly.
That's right. And when was it we had the deluge winter? It's 2014, wasn't it? 13, 14, when it just didn't stop raining. It just rained and rained and rained and rained. That's certainly where I am anyway. But in Scotland, I think that's quite a snowy winter, wasn't it? Over the mountainous areas. I think the ski resorts did really, really well that winter.
Yes.
14. So,
and this winter as well. And there was this. I mean, I guess there's this consecutive effect because I mean, what would be really interesting is if this kept on happening. If we saw 10 years worth of these sorts of winters, the snow patches are going to keep getting bigger. On the basis that once you have more snow, they reflect the sun's heat back, and they become harder to melt when they're bigger. So it'd be interesting that if there were 10 of these winters, or 20 or 30 of 2014s, whether that would be enough to trigger the formation of a glacier in Scotland. I mean, it's not going to happen, but hypothetically, if we kept on getting these sorts of winters, you could sort of imagine that eventually you'd get a glacier forming in Scotland.
I really couldn't stand another winter like 2014. That was a very, very horrible, depressing winter, all that rain. It really, really got on my nerves in the end. Keep going out the back door and getting soaked. So no, thank you. Sorry, but
well, we might well get it. I mean, it's statistically it's far more likely than getting a cold winter.
That's right, it is. Actually, I wouldn't mind having a dry winter, just with high pressure over the country, but it wouldn't be very good for finding things to talk about on the website. So.
Oh no. So I mean, we still have this idea. I mean, it's briefly colder at 192. I mean, I'll just check the temperature and see at the 850 level and see if it's really that cold. So I mean, the minus 4 line is still a long way from the UK. So wintry showers restricted exclusively to higher levels. And then the high pressure comes back, like the GFS and GM were suggesting, and then at 240, that's different.
Yeah,
that's very different.
That's really deeply in that low, isn't it? So that sort of the Atlantic strikes back, and that would shake things up, I think, if that came up. But it's not. We've not really seen another model that looks like that at day 10. So it's probably, if we're playing it safe, it's probably overdoing that low pressure and developing it too much. But if it did come off like that, that would shake things up, I think. And
I mean, these are things are called dartboard lows, aren't they? These ridiculously deep depressions, 945 millibars. Yeah, I don't think that's going to happen. I'm going to put myself out there and say that the ECM is talking nonsense. We're not going to get a low. I mean, if all the models were suggesting it, I'd be tempted to say, but these dartboard lows appear on the models quite a lot. I've seen these things appear a lot on the models over the years, and it's very, very rare that we actually get one this deep in reality. I mean, 945 is not really that deep for the south of Iceland. They tend to get these things more regularly than certainly that we do, but I think it's unlikely that we'll see this monster low area of low pressure.
But if it did happen, it would certainly sort of break the pattern and shake things up quite a lot. So
I hope this doesn't happen. This is a miserable. I mean, look, the cold front. You don't, it doesn't require any intelligence at all to find where the cold front is. You can see how well defined that cold front is. You can just point to it immediately. That is a really well defined cold front. If that came across the UK, it would be horrible. And I mean, look at these winds coming from behind. I mean, that I hope this doesn't come off, because this says to me cold, wet, and windy.
Yeah.
It's probably quite cold on the back of that. I wouldn't be surprised if the -4 line. I mean, okay, it's not that cold, but I mean, it's that is not a very nice. I really hope that doesn't come off. I can tell you, I don't want that to happen. That's pretty horrible.
Of course, the year I was talking about a few minutes ago, 2009, had a very dry October. That did flip and had a very wet November. I can't remember quite how it happened, whether it's a gradual breakdown, whether it was very deep monster lows, just blew everything apart with the high pressure that had been dominating through October 2009. But so we could get a flip and we could go into something significantly more unsettled and wetter for November. It's not beyond the realms of impossibility that could happen, but whether it would happen as that is showing with such a deepening of the low pressure, I'm very dubious.
I mean, I'd be inclined to say that my interpretation of that ECM chart is a suggestion that things are going to turn more unsettled. I don't think it's implying that we're going to get a 945 millibar low. I think that's highly. I mean, like I say, 945 millibar lows do happen in that part of the world. They don't really happen over the UK, but they do happen to the south of Iceland. But I'd be very surprised if we get one of those. It could happen, but there's a colloquial name for these things. Actually, they're called bombs. When you get a certain level of deepening over a short amount of time. When you get a divergence in the upper atmosphere and you get a lot of air being taken out of these systems, the pressure really falls very rapidly, and they call these systems bombs because they develop so rapidly, and they're associated with extremely strong winds, so hurricane force winds if they actually hit you. I mean, when was the last time we actually got hit by a bomb?
Oh, I can't remember, but I think we had last October was this. Let's talk about a bomb, but whether it actually
it was in the Daily Express though. They always go on with that.
Excuse me, I can't remember whether there was a lot about a bomb, but I can't remember actually whether it was a bomb. Really, I don't think it was. I think it was actually quite a mild storm in the end. But I'm sure somebody will correct me because I'm probably remembering it wrong or misremembering, as somebody famously said.
I mean, the most famous bomb that I can recall was the Michael Fish hurricane. It wasn't a hurricane, but it was a bomb. So you can call it a bomb, but you can't call it a hurricane. But that's the most famous bomb I can remember. I mean, these things are every bit as violent as a Category 1, even Category 2 hurricane if they hit you, but they're very, very rare. They're basically the mid-latitudes versions of hurricanes. If they hit you, they give you very, very strong winds. They're just quite. They don't. To actually have one of these things hitting the UK is pretty unusual, though.
Yeah, that's right. We are at the time of year where you would expect if we were going to get one, we probably would have the greatest chance of getting one around this time of the year. But no, I think to go from such a dry, high pressure dominated pattern and then going to something as stormy as that very quickly is very unlikely to occur.
Makes for interesting discussion now. So shall we go now to the other long range models, and then we can maybe take some more questions. So I'm just looking what we've got. You'll have to explain these because this is the Japanese one, right? Is this JMA?
Yeah, this is the JMA. So this is for November. So if you scroll down, carry on scrolling down, and we've got the 500 millibar heights.
So this is the 500 millibar heights here.
The next one up.
Oh, this one here is 500 millibar heights.
That's right. Yeah. So that's.
I guess these lines represent the actual 500 millibar heights, and the colours represent the anomalies.
That's right. Yeah. So that's Atlantic driven for November.
All this blue over the UK.
That's right, and in the Atlantic, the jet streams coming through. So that's unsettled. If you scroll down, the next box is for. If you scroll down, the next box is for temperature. So it's suggesting a little bit on the cool side. Again,
what I get from this and the other model that we looked at earlier is that November is going to be cold zonal.
Yeah, that's probably from the blob that we talked about at the start. That's probably from those cold temperature anomalies in the Atlantic. So, yeah, but how much influence that really has, because what we've got to keep on board is that if it's an Atlantic-driven month, then we'll be restricting the chance of night frost So if it's windy, there's not going to be a huge amount of frost. So, but it could be a chilly month with that cold anomaly in the Atlantic.
Look at this one though. I mean, I'm guessing the arrows are. It says 850 millibar wind, so I'm guessing these arrows aren't anomalies. They're actually what's happening. I mean, the winds are coming from the northwest. It's zonal, but that could be cold. If this comes off like the Met Office model and this model is suggesting, we could see a lot of snow for northwest Scotland. I don't think we'll see any for the southeast, but to me, the fact that we've got these cold anomalies combined with this very zonal situation means that we could see an awfully snowy, relative to what it usually is, because November, of course, is not a snowy month, but we could see an awful lot more snow than expected for November in the northwest, whereas the southeast will be wondering what all the fuss is about.
That's right. It could be cold zonality. And even in the southeast, if you get a low pressure that sort of stalls, or I probably would be better to say it, if you get a weather front that stalls and it's got cold air catching it up, you can't even in the southeast in November get a little bit of wintry weather. So, yeah, cold, probably a bit stormy and probably quite wet. If you scroll back up, so the next box above those arrows is the temperatures. If we scroll back, a little bit cumbersome to use this website, but that's signaling rainfall. The
top one, or this one,
the second box down. So the rainfall is coming out a bit above average. Precipitation is above average, so it's
only a little bit above average, and to me that suggests northwesterly rather than westerly. Because of course, if it's westerly, it's going to be a lot above average. But the fact it's only a little bit above average is more northwest rather than west.
Yeah, but the other thing we have to keep on board is that these models very rarely go to the deeper colours, the deeper end of the scale. But it's a bit above average anyway with the rainfall. It's quite unsettled, Atlantic driven, and possibly quite cold with northwesterly winds. So,
I think it's clear that we're not going to be seeing high pressure in Scandinavia and an easterly wind dragging snow showers into the southeast. It's going to be northwestern. I mean, if it's going to be unsettled, and any snow is going to be in the north and the west, except as you said that there's an unusual event that brings things a little bit more south than usual.
That's right. We have to remember though, this is a very dramatic flip on what we've had for October. So it's this idea that we're getting a flip in the pattern for November. So it could come off like this, but we have to be a little bit wary that this is a significantly different pattern to what we've had. So maybe it'll come off, maybe it won't. I've not got a great deal of confidence in any of the longer range stuff at the moment, really.
Okay, so I guess we can go a little bit further on, can't we? This is December.
Yeah, we can go to January with this particular update from the Japanese model this month.
So, it's not, the blue isn't as deep as the as it was, so still zonal, but less significantly so.
Yeah, that's quite a strange anomaly, isn't it? Because we've got above average pressures around Newfoundland and over in the over the American side of the Atlantic. So that's probably associated with all the rigid over Canada again. And then sort of under a shallow trough, and it looks like there's above average heights down across Spain as well. So it's rather an odd pattern, but potentially it turns a bit cooler, I would think, with that again.
So there's the suggestion that Scandinavia would be seeing below average heights as well.
That's right, yeah. But I think generally the trough is progressing a little bit further east, so everything getting shoved a bit further east, probably by that blocking around Newfoundland. But it's rather a complicated pattern that for December.
So it could suggest like a continuation of northwesterly winds, still unsettled. Yes. Not particularly cold, but potentially wintry for the northwest.
Yes, possibly. Yeah.
See, look at this. I mean, again, I'm not sure if I'm looking at anomalies here because the colours are clearly anomalies. But these arrows. It says wind 850, and to me that says the wind at the wind vectors at the 850 millibar level. And if this is right, it suggests that there's a really quite it's really quite cold. It's zonal, but it is cold zonal. It's not mild zonal. It's not. We're not talking about the jet stream to the north of the UK. We're talking about the jet stream over the UK and some cold northwesterly wind. I know they're coming from the east here, but let's be realistic. It's not cold northwesterly winds. You know, it's
Yeah,
interesting.
that trough is entrenching cooler air from the northwest, and particularly for Scotland, these could be quite wintry months. Surprisingly so, if it was to come off as this is suggesting, it is possible that Scotland particularly could have quite a lot of, albeit fairly marginal situations perhaps, but quite wintry couple of months are possible there for November and December, less so obviously for the south.
I mean, last year the sea surface temperatures. Am I right in thinking that the sea surface temperatures are about 1 degree colder than they were last year?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, maybe even a little bit more.
But 1 degree is huge in terms of snow marginality. I mean, if last year had been 1 degree colder, there would have been a lot more snow. I mean, 1 degree makes all the difference. So I mean, even if we get a repeat of last year, given the fact that the sea surface temperatures are a little bit colder, there could still be quite a lot of snow for the west. And the west is not used to seeing a lot of snow. It's usually the east, but this could be this could be an unusual winter where the west benefits the most.
Yeah, like I said, if we can, the first part of a winter, if that is sort of cold zonality, with a fair few cold snaps as low pressure clears the country and pulls down those northwesterly winds. If we get that in the first half of the winter, and then the second half we get the blocking coming along that the UK Met is sort of hinting at, then we could actually finish up with quite a coldish winter.
I mean, the CET will probably still be close to average, if not a little bit above, with all this. Wouldn't you say?
Yeah, probably, unless something unusual was to happen. But of course, you don't know what effect that you're going to have with the cold temperatures in the Atlantic. But of course, in summer, that cold effect, and autumn, the cold sea surface temperatures in the Atlantic, the effect is probably more pronounced in winter because, as I've explained, in winter, the key to getting really cold winter temperatures, certainly in terms of Central England temperature anyway, is to get a lot of cold nights, a lot of frosty nights. And if we're in a mobile setup, we probably won't be getting a great deal of frost down in the south. So, like you say, the Central England temperature could actually be a little bit above average, albeit it's more wintry in the north.
Yeah. I'm a little bit skeptical just because cold zonality is an unusual situation. It's not something that really happens that often. It seems that when you get blocking entrenched, it's quite stable. It doesn't happen that often, but once you get blocking, it stays there. And when you get zonality, it stays there. But cold zonality is it's something that doesn't really seem like, it seems pretty unnatural. It doesn't seem right. It seems like it goes against the way things should be.
I think we had it more when the Atlantic was in its last cold phase, because as we know, the Atlantic moves through these colder and warmer phases in roughly sort of 20 to 30 year cycles. So the last cold phase of the Atlantic was around 1963, 1995, or something like that, mid-90s. So we did tend to get more cold zonality in that period, I think, than we've had since the Atlantic went warm, because we've been in a warm phase of the Atlantic Ocean, and in theory we still are in the warm phase of the Atlantic. And what's happened with this cold blob sort of goes against the warm AMO that we are still basically in. So we've deviated from where you would typically expect us to be. But from 1995 to sort of just this year, we've tended not to get much cold zonality, but it is something, of course, because as the air comes across the Atlantic, it's moderated or cool, depending on what state the Atlantic is in. So it is something that tends to go more with the Atlantic being in a cold phase.
Okay, so let's go to third month, see how this pans out. Well, trough has moved a little bit further south, but it's still blue over the UK.
That's right. That's again quite a difficult quite a difficult pattern. We've got a lot of red appearing, because the problem with these charts, in fact, you can't really see what's going on over the pole. So we've got a lot of red appearing around Newfoundland, and it looks like it's possibly going up to Greenland. But we've also got the trough centered to the west, so it's again quite difficult to ascertain exactly what that's showing. But I would suggest it's probably going more westerly, actually, with the wind flow.
This is sort of goes more against what the other models were showing with a colder progression. This is not consistent with that.
Yes, I mean, possibly. It does go a little bit against the UK Met, doesn't it, actually? Although, as I say, we can't see what's going on over the pole. So if blocking is appearing over the pole...
Well, we see high pressure over the Mediterranean, and we don't really see the low pressure over Scandinavia like we did with the previous month.
Yeah, that's right. I'd like to be able to see what's happening over the pole on that, but I think that's westerly is coming back.
Seems a lot more westerly there, yeah. Definitely southwesterly winds over most of the UK. Is that as far as we can go?
Yeah, that's as far as we go with the JMA. So that just goes up to January, unfortunately.
I have one more model here. You'll have to explain this one to me as well. What's this? What am I looking at here?
This is the Pajams Tec IOD. Everybody likes Pajams Tec. So what you got to do is the parameter box. Go to surface air temperature anomaly.
So we can't look at pressure. We can just look at.
No, just temperatures.
Okay. So this is so we're looking at December to February here.
That's right.
Continentality again, cold over the UK and Scandinavia, but warm over Europe.
Yeah, most of Europe looks very warm. Most of America looks cold. Most of Canada looks warm. But the problem with Pajams Tec, as I think I've explained this in longer range model updates, the problem with Pajams Tec is that it seems, and it's very unusual that it does this, because most of the long range models seem to be a bit biased towards being a bit above average, really. But this one seems to be a little bit biased to being colder than average. So you look, when a season is 3 months away, it can look really very cold, and then it'll moderate that cold and eventually finish up milder than average. So, and that's very mild winter being signalled there for most of Europe, isn't it? So
it's not a good sign. I mean, I would much rather that the UK was white and the Europe was blue than this one, because when the UK is blue and Europe is red, it really says that's going to be zonal, isn't it? This is not blocking. This is zonal. I mean, it's probably cold zonal. I mean, you said that you didn't want to repeat of last year, but to be honest, looking at these models, it suggests that we are going to get a repeat of last year, but just a slightly colder version of last year.
If you go back up to parameter and find, it's the box above, so it's a precipitation anomaly. That'll give you a rough idea of what the pattern is, and the pattern is suggesting it's drier than average to the north and west with those sandy colours, and it's a bit wetter than average across Central Europe. So quite why Central Europe is so mild, I'm not sure.
It's probably what we're seeing here is that we're probably seeing high pressure over the Mediterranean, which is why we've got these brown colours here. Europe is probably low pressure dominated, and the reason that the northwest is probably dry is because we're probably inheriting those quite cold, dryish, showery type conditions from the northwest. I mean, for all we know, the wind could just constantly be in, well, not constantly, but it could be in the northwest sector an awful lot this year. Again, yeah. It seems to me that we are going to be seeing just on, obviously, you know, the caveat is you can't trust these that much, but it's on the basis of the models that we're seeing today, it seems to me that we're going to be seeing a colder version of last year, slightly colder version of last year, but still the wind mostly coming from the Atlantic.
Yeah, that's possible. If it was that sort of pattern, though, I would expect Scandinavia to be a bit wetter. So it's a bit odd, quite what that's doing. But anyway, it suggests that it could be a fairly coolish winter. So Certainly for the north, there'd be some wintry potential with that.
Okay, we can go to March and see if that. I don't know if that's going to make much of a difference. The second part of the sort of early spring now.
This is the anomaly for the spring, which is March to May.
Still cold Atlantic air temp anomaly here, yeah. Slightly colder for Europe, but not really that impressive.
No,
So
and
the northwest is still cold. I mean, if you want an easterly dominated winter, you'd expect Iceland to be quite warm, but it isn't. So probably cold zonality. That's what I'm seeing.
This model is very keen on having America be pretty cold, both for winter.
That's not. I mean, that's expected, isn't it, based on the El Nino? We see this cold weather in the south and the east.
Yeah, but the red over Canada gives it away. There's high pressure up there, and it's driving the cold array down. So, I mean, do you want to have a look at summer? You can look at
okay.
August.
Well, it's too late now, isn't it? Now we are seeing that now we are seeing the warmer colours over Iceland and the colder colours over Europe. It's too late now.
But that's what I was talking about with this model, because that's as far out as you can go. So that's a long way away, and a long way away it looks really cold, doesn't it? So, but as that gets closer, keep an eye on it over the next few months. As that gets closer, that will probably be moderated, warmer.
Okay, we're seeing this dry. I mean, cold and dry in the summer. What sort of pattern has created that? I mean, if it's cold and dry, the only way you can really get cold and dry in the summer is to have northerly winds. But sustained northerly winds are quite unusual, especially in the summer.
Yeah, that's right. I think it's gone. I'm not sure what pattern really it's going for. It would be very helpful if you could see a pressure or a height anomaly for these, but I think it's just doing what it always does, which is it's too cold for the final 3 months. And as we progress through the next few months, those temperature anomalies for June to August will be moderated, and it could finish up as significantly warmer than average summer. Who knows? But I think the model is doing what it usually does. It's very unusual. I can't think of another seasonal model that does this, that has a cold bias, but I'm sure this one does have a cold bias in its extended art.
I mean, if the wind is in the northwest, I mean, how much would it take for it to go into the north? Probably. I mean, I don't know.
In summer.
No, in wind. I mean, if we do get a northwesterly dominated winter.
Oh right, yeah.
It take for the wind to go from the northwest to the north.
You get a lot of northerly winds briefly, can't you? As the low pressures exit and go off in Scandinavia, you can get a lot of northerly winds on the backside. But of course, the next low will roll in, so it could be the famous toppler winter, where the low pressure exits, pulls down a northerly. You get 2 or 3 days of cold, frosty weather with snow showers in the north, and then the next low pressure rolls in, and the whole thing starts all over again.
I mean, I guess it seems though that might happen quite a lot, but there's very, very little sign from what maybe you disagree with me. But there's very little sign of any substantial blocking in any northeasterly type conditions, or Scandinavian highs, Greenland highs, Siberian highs, that sort of thing. I don't think we're going to really be seeing. It's going to happen now, isn't it? The Daily Express is finally going to be right for the first time ever.
Certainly for the first half of winter, there's very little evidence. I'm interested in what the UK Met Office is doing for the second half of winter, which is bringing some blocking through. And I'll be doing a seasonal model round when we'll look at these 3 models, but there'll also be other models to look at next Sunday. It won't be this Sunday, but it'll be next Sunday, the last Sunday of the month. There will be some other models that sort of suggest this idea that we progress to a more block pattern. Actually, I've been looking at a new model, but I can't say a huge amount about. But the access to the model is restricted. So I've been looking at that, and it's very much along the lines of the UK Met, which is to produce more blocking in the second half of winter. But that all probably hinges on whether or not we was to get a sudden stratospheric warming event.
And Gav will be, I think, on his website and in his videos talking about the CFS model at some point in the near future. So we're not going to do the CFS model today here in the live stream, but Gav, I think, will be talking about the CFS soon in one of his videos.
Yeah, that'll be tomorrow.
Okay, tomorrow. Check out his videos tomorrow on his website. So he'll be doing that tomorrow.
But if you like it cold, I'll warn you now, it's not great. So it'll hide behind the sofa time a little bit for CFS.
Well, on that note, should we maybe finish off with some questions, and then, because we've gone on for an hour and a half now, so that's about the same length as the other one. So maybe finish off with some questions.
Yeah, sure. So firstly, Twitter, Matthew Card has asked, people say there's going to be a repeat of 2009 winter. I think he means 2009, 2010. Is there any chance of that happening? Well, as we've explained, 2009, 2010 had a very dry October. It was an El Nino winter, so there's a bit of a match there. But we've also explained that the winter of 2009, 2010 is very unusual compared to other El Nino winters. So it's a possibility, but I wouldn't say a winter that cold as we had in 2009, 2010 is all that likely at this stage. But of course, it's still early days. I've not done the winter forecast yet, so we'll wait and see. We've got some questions at Gaz Weather Things. Paul Stanya is asking us, when do you think the high pressure will settle over southern Europe, allowing blocking to the north? Well, as we saw with these long-range models, there's not much sign of that for the first part of winter, particularly. We may get that more later on in the winter. Lucy is asking, why do you think the British newspapers are so keen to forecast the coldest winters? Why do you think, Quantum?
I really want to comment on this more. I really do. I'm quite an opinionated sort of person, so I do have strong opinions. But I worry that if I talk about this too much, certain people will get very unhappy and try to sue me, because I have known this sort of thing to happen in the past. That there are a certain group of people that don't like any kind of disagreement. In short, I think these headlines are nonsense. I think they're very misleading. I don't think it's appropriate to be sending out these headlines such that elderly people are going to be reading them and going to be worried about this sort of thing. The chance of a very cold winter is small. It's small every year. I mean, like I said, 2010. While we may see another month, maybe in January or February, that approaches that in our lifetime, the chance of another December like that it's very unlikely that we're ever going to see a December as cold as 2010 in our lifetime again. It's very unusual. Yet we would have it, if we were to believe some of these papers, we'd have to believe that this happens every year. I mean, it doesn't. It's just nonsense. I mean, it's very rare for this sort of thing to happen. And obviously, looking long term, there's the insinuation that the solar cycles might make this event slightly more common in the future because we are going to enter a phase where the solar activity is going to be reduced. But you also have to temper the fact that we've got global warming that's also happening in the background. So the last time we had this solar minimum, we didn't also have global warming, and that is we're seeing quite a significant temperature rise that has to counter the fact that blocking might be more likely in the future. Colder winters in Western Europe and Eastern America might be more likely in the future. But are they going to be as severe as the mini ice age? I mean, I wouldn't bet my life on it, but I'd bet a sizable amount of money on that we're not going to see a mini ice age in our lifetimes.
No, I think that's very unlikely as well. And all I'd say about why the newspapers seem so keen to forecast coldest winters for decades is probably because they sell a lot of newspapers when they do it. I don't know, but
yeah, the newspapers. I mean, when they put weather stories on, the sales goes up by something. I mean, it's ridiculous. It's something like fivefold. They have a fivefold increase in newspapers being sold by putting these headlines on. So it's in their best interests to do it. But I wouldn't exactly call it responsible. I'm not saying it should be banned, but it seems pretty irresponsible to be scaremongering essentially with all this.
So let's see if
I've got one from. I'm not sure if you asked this because I was just looking through. Maybe I'm sorry if I'm repeating a question that's already been asked, but someone called Matthew is asking. People say there's going to be a repeat of the 2009 winter. Is there any chance of that happening?
Yeah, we just answered that. As I said, probably is quite unlikely. But in 30 days. Antonio has asked another question. Do you think weather forecasts in general depend too much on computer models without scrutinising them in great detail? Question 2, does La Nina have any effect on the UK winter? As far as models go, they're a tool, a very useful tool. Particularly the shorter range models have improved dramatically over the past few years, through my lifetime. When I was a young boy, it was very hard to forecast more than 2 or 3 days ahead. Now you can do 5 days fairly well, really. And in some situations, you can go further ahead, say 7 or 10 days. So certainly computer models have forecast have improved a lot. They do need interpretation, though. As far as La Nina is concerned, well, I don't want to give too much away, but if there is a connection, I think, anyway, I'm not sure what you think, Quantum, but I think there's a connection between when you flip from an El Nino to a La Nina, the summer that goes along with that flip, that very often seems to be a cool, wet summer in the UK. Not sure why that would be, but there does seem to be a connection between summers that are going from El Nino to La Nina being very mixed. Thinking particularly of 2007, other ones I can think of, 1998, the summer of 1998, probably 1988 was another one. So there does seem to be a connection between years that are going from El Nino to La Nina and poor summers coinciding with those years.
I don't know anything about that question, so I guess you've answered that very well. I've learned something with that.
And Stuart Markham, my good friend Stuart, who helps out with my videos sometimes, is asking us, hi, Gavin, ask Q what he thinks to my July Arctic height link to UK winter using the Arctic Oscillation and the North Atlantic Oscillation. You've probably not seen this, I wouldn't think, have you, Quantum?
Could you repeat? Because I just didn't hear because my microphone was bad.
Well, Stuart, my friend Stuart Markham at chorleyweather.com, and this is probably, I'm not sure you're going to really know a great deal about this, but Stuart owns the website chorleyweather.com, and he's done some very interesting research that looks at Arctic heights and sort of with the Arctic Oscillation, I suppose, really, in July, and an apparent link to the subsequent winter. Basically, the idea is that when the Arctic is negative in July, when the Arctic Oscillation is negative in July, there seems to be a link that as you get into the next winter, after that July, then you tend to get a blocking and a colder winter. It's very fascinating research that Stuart's done there. So I suspect you haven't really seen all that much of that research, Quantum. So if anybody wants to check that out, go to chorleyweather.com. I think the link is on my links page, actually. chorleyweather.com. And there's some really fascinating research from Stuart there.
It doesn't surprise me. I mean, intuitively, I guess it's kind of what you would expect.
Yeah.
I mean, because I mean, there's sort of like, I mean, I'm not sure about July in particular, but having high heights over the Arctic is something that you do want to get a cold. I mean, we have had high heights over the Arctic in the last couple of years, but because of the failure to couple that with the Atlantic, it's been cold, relatively cold, but still very zonal.
So the years in Stuart's research are 2009, had the most negative Arctic oscillation in July.
I will just say that the one thing that occurs to me though about this is that the one thing that I mean this research probably I'm guessing, because I have to guess now, but this research I'm guessing has been based on the last several years, I guess, the last several years. However, I see a problem. One problem that occurs to me is that the sea ice in the Arctic, which plays a huge role in how the Arctic behaves, has changed so rapidly since 2012. I mean, I'd be interested to see how if things are no longer as they were. I mean, there's a sort of, I mean, I follow the Arctic sea ice community quite a lot, and there's sort of an indication that since 2012 things have never been quite the same again. So what I'd be my first query about that is, it sounds very interesting. My first query would be, how is the melting sea ice going to affect these predictions? Is it going to mean that these predictions are less reliable because of the sea ice is no longer there? I mean, with regards to high heights in July, that tends to be very bad for sea ice. Incidentally, this is completely incidental, but we had it this year. In July this year, the Arctic was dominated by high heights this year. There was high pressure. North Greenland, the whole Arctic was dominated by high pressure, and it was a complete disaster for the Arctic. It was, I mean, because I quite like it when we get a cold summer, because I don't want the ice to melt. I know it is, but I don't want it to. And it was, when I saw how we were going through July, I was wondering, well, May had been quite a cold month for the Arctic, June had been quite a good month for the Arctic, and August was also quite a good month for the Arctic. Those months were fine. They were not conducive to melting. But July was a complete disaster, and we had those high pressure dominated over the Arctic during July. The July where the sunlight makes the most difference, because in June the sun's stronger, but there's so much snow around it doesn't make much of a difference. In July the sun is strong and there's no snow, so it completely destroys the ice. And we had an entire month of that, and and that one single month, as far as I'm concerned, has undone 2 years worth of ice so-called recovery, because the last 2 years were quite good for the sea ice, and that single month in July is we're now like the 4th lowest on record.
I do get concerned about what's going on in the Arctic.
One month can make so much of a difference. It just seems
that is in Stewart's research shows that 2009 had the most negative Arctic oscillation. Then the next year was 2015, so this July. After that, number 3 is 62, and then 68, and then 1950. And all of those, well, we can't say about 2015, but the other 4 were followed by colder winters, obviously. So, yeah, very interesting research. You can go to chorleyweather.com to check that research out.
I certainly will, and I'd be interested to see if he can respond to my question about the sea ice. I mean, even in 2009, the sea ice was significantly better off than it is now. I mean, it was still post 2007. I mean, 2007 again was a big year, but I'd be interested to see how this affects it, because when you get an Arctic that doesn't have much ice in it, the weather patterns are going to change so rapidly. We're going to get the Arctic is going to become more cyclonic, I imagine, but. Yeah. So I mean, based on his research, I guess we can expect a colder winter just because we've had the higher heights during July. I wasn't pleased about it. It was just as devastating for the ice, but I suppose it's quite good for.
Yeah, it is worrying what's happening in the pole.
I mean, there's actually a correlation, isn't there, between months with pretty horrible sea ice and quite cold winters. I mean, 2010 was an awful year for sea ice, and it had a cold winter. 2009 wasn't so bad, but I don't know. Maybe.
And then Tim Mulburn has asked, "Hi guys, just on snow patches, do you think that rather than the heavy high altitude Scottish winter snowfall, the main reason for snow patch survival has been the cool weather in Scotland due to air flowing over the Atlantic cold blob?" And I suppose that has helped. That has helped with it.
Quite a cold summer for Scotland, hasn't it? I mean, I know we had that heat wave in the first part of July, but it's not been an overly warm summer for Scotland, has it?
No, it's not been a particularly warm summer. I would think it's a cumulative effect. So it's been past couple of winters have had quite a lot of snow across Scotland, as we was explaining, and also then with the cool summer. When I say a lot of snow over Scotland, I mean in the mountainous areas, obviously not as much on lower ground, but been a fairly snowy couple of winters in the mountainous areas across Scotland. And then, of course, we've got the cool summer. So I expect it's all combined, really, to keep that snow patch going.
I will say that if you get westerly winds during the summer, they're far less damaging than easterly winds. I mean, like I said, most of these snow patches are going to be on the east-facing hills. That's where most of the snow is going to be preserved. If you get easterly winds, that's going to torch the snow that's surviving. Whereas if you get westerly winds, the westerly winds are going to be far less damaging. So I think there's definitely something to that. That the fact that we've had I'm assuming that we have had a westerly dominated summer, because I'm struggling to remember, but I think we have. So that definitely helps. Definitely does. So yes, I think you're right. It's a combination of the fact that we had a mild westerly moist winter, which produced a lot of snow, and a relatively cool summer, which stopped the snow from melting, and the westerlies kept it in good stead. So I think that's a good combination of those factors.
Yes, I agree.
So I mean, do you want me to take a few questions? I mean, I haven't got that many here, but I've got one from Daniel Finch. What do you think of projects like UK Snow Updates and Snowwatch? Have you even heard of them?
Yes, there's some fantastic websites around that look at snow, and they're specifically interested in snow. So yeah, I keep an eye on all of these websites if I can. Time is limited at this time of year because it all gets very crazy with the updates. But when I can, I do keep an eye on all of the websites that. And I know there's some great people on Twitter as well that look at snow. So yeah, I keep
definitely good to get these websites out. So this is a question I suspect a lot of people will want to know the answer to. Your best guess: how many days, weeks of snow do you think we will have this winter?
That's trying to pin me down, isn't it? So, well, we can't really say at this stage, really. But I mean, I could throw caution to the wind and try and come up with a specific answer, but it's very difficult, I would think, really, to pin that down in terms of days and weeks. So I would think weeks of snow is unlikely this winter at this stage. That may change as we get
further so, on. I mean, to get weeks where you have, I mean, to get the 3-day cold snaps are not that unusual, but to get weeks of snow is, we did it in 2010 again. We had months of snow in 2010. I've never seen that before. I very much doubt the southeast will be seeing weeks of snow. I mean, I'm sure the southeast will see days, but weeks maybe not. The northwest, I suspect, is slightly more likely, but even then, it's very difficult to get weeks of snow, because in order to get having a 3-day cold spell is not that hard. You just need a northerly shot of air, snow showers around the northeast coasts, relatively standard. To get weeks of snow, you need not only a cold pattern, but you need a stable pattern, and that sort of limits what you have to choose from. I mean, really, you're limited to having some form of high pressure to the north of the UK, whether it be in Greenland, Scandinavia, or occasionally even Siberia. That really dominates the weather. But and of course, sometimes when that happens, you get Atlantic depressions that bump into it and produce a lot of snow as well. But these are unusual patterns. I mean, I think it's if I was to say that there's not going to be weeks of snow continuously, of course, I'd probably be very good chance of being right there. I think there's always a chance that I'm going to be wrong there. It always happens sometimes, but
yeah,
very surprised if especially for the southeast, we see weeks rather than days. I think days is basically a given. I mean, it's very unusual to not to have a winter where you don't see days of snow, but weeks, probably not.
Right. People forget that our default flow is southwesterly. So it means that weeks of snow, months of snow despite what you would think by reading the newspapers, are always going on about weeks and months of snow. Very unusual, very rare. I would think it's very likely there will be some days of snow this winter, but how many, it's too early to say.
Okay, that's all the questions from the YouTube chat. Are there any others on Gav's vids, or is that about everything?
I think everything. I think I've answered everything on Gav's weather vids. I'll just check Twitter one last time. No, I don't think we've got anything on Twitter. The website, the Snowwatch website, on Twitter that I was talking about is snowwatch.org.uk. So give that a look through the coming months, see what's going on with snow there. But no, I think we've answered all the questions that
okay.
Answered.
So I hope you enjoyed this podcast. We probably will do some more, especially if the weather gets interesting. So subscribe to the playlist. I've linked it to a few of you on Twitter. There's a playlist on. If you look on my channel and click on the playlist, you can see a playlist of all these videos. And Gav will also there's a part of his website where these videos can be found as well, so you can watch them at your heart's content. That's basically everything. I'll put all the links in the description to all the models that we used and to Gav's weather vids, of course, if you didn't watch it on Gav's weather vids. Any last words, Gav?
No, just say it's been great fun. And thanks very much for an entertaining couple of hours, Quantum. And tomorrow, so it's a weekend forecast tomorrow, of course, at the website. And also CFS 6 months look ahead. As I say, that's going to be a bit get behind the settee if you want cold weather. I'm not giving anything away with that because CFS has been in that sort of mood for the past few updates. So it's going to be another one of those that's not great for people who like cold and snowy conditions. Sunday is going to be the 6th winter update. And between all of that is my birthday tomorrow. So I'm going to try and get a night off tomorrow from all of the craziness and have a bit of downtime for my birthday.
Happy birthday, Gav.
Oh, thank you very much.
Yeah, so thanks everyone for joining. We'll see you sometime in the future.